Entrepreneurs aren't born, they're brewed. You are now listening to the Entrepreneur Podcast with your host, Adam McChesney. Let's grow!
Welcome to the Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Adam McChesney, and I want to thank you for being here today. We are live from Half Coast Studios here in St. Louis, Missouri. Thank you to Half Coast for this amazing setup and sponsoring the show. If you're looking to start your podcast or take your current one to the next level, then you definitely need to come check out what they have going on. Contact them today for a free consultation. And to the guests, if you're listening, please be sure to subscribe to the show and leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. It goes a long way, and if you can share our content on social media by tagging me, we can get this incredible content out to more people. Today, we have another amazing episode and guest lined up for you. I originally met this guest after our team at Height Digital was able to connect us. After we got to talking, I knew that her story and experience would provide insane amounts of value to our audience. She is an award-winning entrepreneur, consultant, community builder, connector, storyteller, expert marketer, social media maven, spokesperson, on-air expert, small business champion, and most importantly, a mom. My guest today is Lindsay Pinchuk. She is the founder of Lindsay Pinchuk Marketing and Consulting and podcast host of Dear Founder, currently residing in Chicago. Lindsay, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for that introduction.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on today. I know we originally connected about a month and a half ago, and really resonated with a lot of your story in just terms of, I think, things that our audience will get and you'll provide some insane amount of value. So I'm really excited to have you here today. And for our audience, we like to take our guests through their entrepreneurial journey and compare that to the beer brewing process, which is where we came up with the Entrepreneur Podcast in general and kind of the outline. So Lindsay, the first thing we like to talk about is obviously with beer, there's a history behind it and a reason why it's getting brewed. If you could let the audience know who you are, obviously where you come from, things like that, but start right now in terms of what you're working on right now, and then we'll work our way backwards from there.
Yeah, of course. So right now I am a year out of exiting my first company that I founded and sold. And I have my own marketing and consulting company. So I help other founders, mostly female, although I have recently been hired by 2 men as well. I help other founders to build and monetize their communities for bottom line success. And I do that through social media, email marketing, content publicity, et cetera. And that is what I'm doing now. And I also host a podcast called Dear Founder, where I share my stories as well as the stories of some of the biggest female founders in the world, who and their journeys of basically starting and growing their own businesses. So do you want me to tell you how I got there?
Yeah, that would be great. Let's dive into that.
Okay. So I grew up in Detroit. I grew up in the Detroit suburbs, and I moved to Chicago after college, and I started a career in advertising sales, which I loved. And then when I got pregnant, I realized that I didn't know anyone else who was pregnant. And I said to my husband, there has to be some kind of business in this. It's like, I cannot go through this by myself. The irony of the situation is all of my friends have 6th graders. I just have the oldest one of the bunch. But I started hosting events for expectant moms in Chicago. And it was before social media. This was in 2010. So Facebook didn't even have business pages. And through word of mouth, I built a community for expectant parents. It was first moms, then parents. And then as my needs as a parent grew, more and more parents started kind of coming into the community. We were connecting them with the best products, resources, information, experts, and then of course, each other. I built that community through a series of partnerships, many partnerships. Some of the biggest ones were with Target and Nordstrom, The Honest Company, Seventh Generation. And we were hosting events in 30 cities across the country. And I was approached in the summer of 2018 to sell my company by 3 entities, actually. And I chose the one that was the best fit for me and my needs at the time. And in the beginning of 2019, I closed that deal. I sold my company to Advantage Marketing Solutions, and then I worked for them for 2.5 years. Last summer, I realized that it was time to exit. And so that is what takes me to where I am now.
That's awesome. I appreciate you giving that explanation and kind of walking us through your journey. I think it's just a phenomenal story. I think the one really cool thing is that you saw in your own life, you saw a need and an opportunity and you capitalized on it. So when you were obviously trying to navigate this and figure out how to get this started, did you just right away quit your job, or were you working your job and then building this business on the side, or what did that look like?
Yeah. So I was working at the Hearst Corporation. I worked for Good Housekeeping. I was one of their Midwest sales directors, and I loved my job. And so that's like also the irony of the situation was I was not looking to leave. And I was working at Good Housekeeping while I was pregnant, and I was hosting these events kind of on the weekend. And when I had my daughter, I was obviously on maternity leave, and I had a really good baby. I mean, I always joke that if Bump Club started when my second baby was born, it probably wouldn't have gotten off the ground because she still doesn't sleep and she's 8. But my first started sleeping through the night at 6 weeks, and she slept all the time. And so I'm not really one to sit still. And during those times, I was working on my business, and I had a lot of time because I was on maternity leave. And that was when my business really kind of went from here to the next level. And I ended up going back to work for a few weeks, and I had gotten a boss while I was right before I went on maternity leave. And she was not a mom. It was a woman. She was not a mom. And she made it very clear when I came back that I was not to work on my side business on her time. And, I had never had a problem like missing my goals or anything. I mean, I exceeded my goals every single year through my sales career. And I knew that she was going to make it hard for me. And so I said to my husband, I think that this is kind of the time that I take a chance and I try to see what I can do with this company. And what's the worst that happens? I'll go back and get a job. Now, I never looked back. So, I mean, that's the great thing. And, one of the things that I did leave out of kind of the story was I grew the community to reach 3 million people a month. So, we were reaching 3 million people per month and generating 7 figures in revenue year over year for the last 5 years that I owned it. So it really became something very big and much bigger than I ever thought possible or that I ever even imagined, because I really didn't have a plan for this. I don't want to say it just happened, but it happened step by step. And, I kind of took every step and grew it bigger and bigger and bigger.
That's incredible. I just love that story. And I think our audience is really going to enjoy hearing about that. I think the other aspect is, a lot of people have excuses, and especially over the last couple of years, there's been things that you can say, hey, I got this going on. I got that going on. I just love that you took the opportunity when you did have some time, downtime after just having a baby, that you're like, I'm not a person to sit still. I want to go create something, and I want to utilize this extra time that I have. So I think kudos to you, obviously, as well. In 7 figures in revenue for the last 5 years, 3 million people that you were able to impact a month is just incredible. So what we're, going from, I think, we haven't had a lot of guests that have sold their company and then also kind of stayed around a little bit and worked for them. So I'd like to dive into that real quick before we get into everything else.
Yeah.
What was that experience like? What was the transition like? And what were some of the things where you're just like, hey, I think I want to go do something else now. It's now kind of time.
I'm fully transparent that, there are some things I cannot say because I am under contract, but it was not perfect. And I think it's very important as an entrepreneur to, one, say that and to pay that bit of information forward, and to two, hear it if you're on the other end, because I think a lot of people see founders selling businesses and they think that it is like the end all and be all, and like it's like all happy dances, and there are hardships too. And I think going into it, I knew that because I did talk to a lot of founders prior to selling my company, and I kind of had that expectation. But I think you always also hope that it's not going to happen to you and things are going to be perfect. But when someone is acquiring a business, you have to fit into their business. They're not going to fit into yours. And so, I went from owning my own company, having a say in how things were run and who was hired and what I was paying them. And, I built also a company for moms, and I had mostly moms, all women, but mostly moms working for me. And I built a company on the notion that give a busy mom something to do, and they can do anything and do it better than anyone else, because that is kind of just the DNA of a busy mom. And we didn't have, 9 to 5 hours. It wasn't like that. And all of a sudden I was going back working for a very corporate entity. And I had people putting meetings on my calendar and I'd be like, what's this? Like, I don't even know what this is. Who is this? And, there wasn't really much asking of me and of my time. And, that was a really big adjustment. And I think the biggest adjustment for me, and when I realized that it wasn't mine anymore and that maybe it was time to move on, was when during the sale process, I was implicitly told that, nothing was going to change. And they wanted the DNA of my company, and they loved the authenticity of my company. And one of the things that we always talked about on social media at Bump Club was not politics. We never talked about politics, but we always talked about social issues as they related to moms and to women, as well as to the minorities who were within our community. And during 2020, when there was a lot going on in the world around us, I was told we couldn't talk about anything that had any controversy. And to me, that took away from like the brand, because, we always saw both sides of the coin. And I felt like we really needed to support certain members of our community during 2020. And we just weren't allowed to talk about certain things because we were part of this larger entity. And that was really the moment that I said, well, maybe I want to be doing something else because I'm feeling a little bit silenced. And the other thing, to answer your question about what kind of pushed me to make the decision to leave, was I was working a lot more than I had wanted to. And, part of the reason I sold my company was because I bootstrapped it for 10 years and I didn't want to work 100 hours a week anymore. And, it's not that I didn't want to work. I'm an incredibly hard worker, but I was being pulled in a lot of different directions and I wasn't always getting the resources that I needed to fill in some of the voids. And I was also being approached by a lot of brands that I worked with, and also just from connections, who wanted to hire me for projects. They wanted me to build community for them. They wanted me to run their social content. They wanted me to work with their agencies on developing a strategy for more engagement. And I wanted to take on these projects and I couldn't because I was working 80 to 100 hours a week. And it was really in that moment that I also realized that I could be making a lot more money working for myself again. And I knew what these companies were willing to pay me. And to me, I asked the question of like, why am I shortchanging myself and my family to stick around for a company that really isn't mine anymore? And I took it to where, as far as I could take it, I sold it. I really wanted that sale to help build it up with more resources, both monetary and otherwise. And it's time for someone else to carry on the torch of Bump Club. And I also was no longer a young mom anymore. My kids are now 11 and 8, and it felt inauthentic for me to continue to show up and talk about being a mom of a baby when I hadn't done that in 8-9 years. And I wasn't pushing strollers anymore. I wasn't using the products we were talking about. And that's how I built the business. I built the business by showing up as myself. And I didn't feel it was applicable for me to talk about experiences a decade prior at that point. And so those were kind of all the things that led me to leave. And a lot of people ask me, and I don't know if you're going to ask me this, but a lot of people say, do you regret it? And I do not at all. I mean, I am so grateful and thankful for the fact that I was able to sell my business. It is an incredibly hard thing to do. Just the experience alone, I'm so thankful to have that experience. But I also sold my business right before the pandemic, and we were an events-based company, events first, content second. I turned the business around during the pandemic, and really and truly, I saved a 7-figure deal with Target through, by taking something that was event-based and putting it online. And it set the stage for kind of how Bump Club is run today. It's more of a digital company than anything. But had we not been bought, we would have gone out of business during the pandemic. All of my competitors in the parenting space who were hosting events went out of business. So I do not regret it for a minute.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That was some incredible information. And like I said, we really haven't had someone on the podcast that's gone through something of this nature. So I really appreciate the insight there. I know our audience is going to love that as well. Great story, and kind of seeing how everything has came full circle to where we're at today. So the next thing that we like to get into is obviously great beer is made from some incredible ingredients, especially the really good ones, as is the entrepreneurial journey of our guests. So what are 3 things that have made you successful in your journey thus far?
I would say one is persistence. I I've never been one to like show up and do something half-ass. That's for sure. But I didn't think that it would become, Bump Club would become what it did. And then, now I'm building this new company and it's far exceeded my expectations after only a year. But a lot of that is I just don't settle for anything less than my best. And I am persistent. When I want something, I manifest it and I really work to accomplish it. And I know there's a lot of talk right now about like not buying into the hustle culture and whatnot. I don't think working hard is necessarily a bad thing. And I don't think working hard is hustling. I think it's discipline. I think it's knowing, I guess this would be my second thing. You asked me for 3. So the first would be persistence and never saying no. The second thing would be, really knowing and understanding when to turn it on and when to turn it off and not to burn yourself out. I am very good at taking breaks, especially now. I was not as good the first time around, but when I started taking breaks and realizing that I needed to have that balance for myself, my family, my business, it really and truly helped me to be able to turn it on more when I was at work. And so I think, a lot of people ask me like, how do you balance everything? And I don't. I mean, that's really, no one does. There's no balance, right? So it's really being able to turn things on and off and know when to do things for yourself. And I think, so that would be number 2. And then number 3, I would say I had a couple. I think that part of what has made me successful in terms of building a community is just like my own humility and I'm humble and I don't like to boast. I don't like to I'm myself. Like I really and truly show up as myself and I share the good and I share the bad. And I'm not afraid to say like, these are my accomplishments because I'm really proud also, but I'm also not afraid of what people are going to think if I talk about failing. And if I talk about something that goes wrong. And it's really important as a founder to be able to know and understand the ability to do those things. And I want to say, actually, I have one more. And the other one is to know when to pivot. And that's something through both Bump Club and Lindsay Pinchuk Marketing and Consulting that it's an innate skill. And it's something that as a founder, you have to know because oftentimes the resources aren't infinite. And if something's not working, that doesn't mean you're failing. You just need to pivot and make a change and figure something else out. And I can count on all my hands and both my hands and both my feet, the times that I have made pivots throughout the last dozen years. And knowing when to do that and not doing it too late is really important.
It's incredible. I think all great points. What I really like that you touched on, and I don't think it's touched on enough, is the balance aspect. So I think everybody talks about work-life balance and they're trying to make sure that everything balances out. And I'm in 100% agreement with you. And I think most entrepreneurs that do it the right way, meaning turning it on and turning it off, it's not necessarily, I know entrepreneurs that go for that balance. And I've been there in my life as well. And when I'm spending time with family in the past, and I'm still guilty of it at times, depending upon what's going on, but like actually not being present. So I might be spending a bunch of time with my wife or with my family or out to dinner or whatever, but I haven't been 100% focused. It's about the quality of the time that you're spending and pouring into where you're at in that present moment versus trying to keep it balanced. And it goes the other way too. You're going to take vacations where it's like, all right, you feel like you're not, like work's down here and everything else is up here. So there's seasons to everything. And so I'm really glad that you touched on that.
Well, and then the other thing too that I think is important is entrepreneurs, like we are entrepreneurs for a reason. I mean, I know a very large part of why I started my own company and then decided to leave corporate America both times was to, spend more time with my family and have the flexibility and be able to make my own schedule. So if I'm all of a sudden like packing my days and I'm not leaving myself the flexibility for myself, or like, for example, yesterday I left work, my office here in my house early, and I took my daughter to a pitching lesson because she plays softball. And you know what? Like, that's why I do this. So I can be present for those scenarios and I can take my kids places and, be with them when they need me. And that's okay. Like so I came home last night, and after my kids went to bed, I worked for a couple hours, and that's pretty normal for me, but I built this so I could do that.
I love it. And that's the why. That's why we do this stuff. That's why we get into entrepreneurship, to be able to ride our own ship. So I love that. The next thing that we'll take a look at is the brewing process as a whole. So, I like this one, probably one of the most of the key points throughout this outline, mostly because everybody thinks that entrepreneurship happens overnight. They think that beer, you just make it and there it is. But we all know that that's not the case. So talk to us about some of the ups and downs of your journey over the past 10 plus years, and kind of what some of the highest of the highs and lowest of the lows were for you.
Yeah. I mean, so I think like the biggest kind of takeaway from all this is that it doesn't happen overnight, to your point. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, and I know I felt like this, feel that, they can do everything and they should do everything, because especially if you're bootstrapping, you don't have a ton of budget behind you. And something that I learned, I don't want to say very early, it was a couple years in, and I wish that I had learned it earlier, was the need to outsource the things that I really wasn't good at. And for me, one of those things was bookkeeping and financials. And I know that that's a pain point for a lot of entrepreneurs. And when I think of the pain that I went through, because I did, I mean, I had an accountant that like wasn't doing the right things for me. I had the IRS show up at my door. I mean, literally, there were just a lot of lessons learned from that when I did decide to pay a few $100s a month, it's not that much, and get a bookkeeper, that's when I saw my business really explode. And it was very eye-opening for me. And I like to share that story for entrepreneurs, because it's so hard sometimes to part with money and to pay someone else to do something that you think you can do. But when you can't do something right, it is so important to hire someone to do it, because you will be able to focus on what you're good at. And that really, for me, was like a huge, like having the IRS show up at my doorstep was a pretty low. Like I thought I was going to go to jail. I mean, I hadn't done anything wrong. I just hadn't signed a paper. There was a paper that hadn't been signed, but, and we fixed it, of course. But, like you said, it does not happen overnight. It is a process, and it's a process even now. Like now I'm taking a lot of what I'm learning, what I learned the first time around, and I'm applying it to Lindsay Pinchuk marketing and consulting. So, I think that, when you ask me the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, so like the lowest of lows would have absolutely been this whole thing with the finance. And I talk about it all the time, because it's like, oh my God. And then another low I would say would be, we reached a point. I had an employee once who, it's not even really worth getting into the whole conversation, but she wasn't invoicing us, and it wasn't an employee, it was a contractor. She wasn't invoicing us. And my bookkeeper at the time never told me. And all of a sudden she came at the end of the year and she slapped like a $50,000 invoice on us. And, and in her contract, it said, if you don't invoice us by a certain date after the month, we're not eligible to pay you. Like, we don't have to pay you. I was never going to not pay her, but she was threatening lawsuits on me, and we ended up paying her. But I didn't have $50,000 as a bootstrap entrepreneur just sitting around. I mean, we were an events-based company. I had to, in December and January, I was putting deposits on event space for the next year. So to me, that was a very low, and it was something I had to get through. And I didn't really have to pay her. I did. I paid her every dime. It took her a little bit more time to do it, but she was absolutely in the wrong, but it really was incredibly, incredibly stressful, and a reminder of just staying on top of your business. Like the bookkeeper didn't tell me, but it was now moving forward. I tell my bookkeeper, I need to know if things are going wrong, or, because that was a very big surprise as a business owner. Oh, when you asked me about, what'd you say?
I said, I believe that. Yeah.
But it's important though to share these stories, because I think they're not talked about enough, to be honest. And I think everyone has a story like this to share.
Oh, yeah.
And when you ask about like the highest of highs, I was named like Crane's best entrepreneur in Chicago in 2014. That was an incredible high. I was approached by the agency that was doing the premiere for A Bad Mom's Christmas, and they had me host a surprise event for 500 moms in Chicago at the Music Box Theater with the entire cast of Bad Moms. I was on a stage with like Kristen Bell and Susan Sarandon. It was pretty fucking awesome, Yeah. And then now, like to this day, like I started a podcast and my podcast has far exceeded my every expectation. And it is connecting me with people that I never thought I'd have the opportunity to interview. And I've interviewed Jen Sherman from Peloton, and she's someone who really pushed me during the pandemic, even through that crazy bike that I own. She pushed me and she motivated me, and I ended up getting to talk to her for an hour, and that was amazing. Catherine Reitman from Working Moms, one of my favorite TV shows. Like the podcast has really set the path for a lot of connections and networking in a way that I never thought possible. And these are all very high highs, and then of course my kids being able to see everything and selling my company, and my kids knowing, and my kids, being very proud. That is probably the highest of high, is when they have those moments where they share their pride in what I'm doing. Cause they're the reason I do everything.
That's incredible. I love that. And yeah, those are some definitely low lows and some definitely high highs, which, makes everything better when it comes full circle. So the next thing we like to get into is the fermentation and conditioning. So obviously this is with beer, the process where we're seeing a final result of a test beer and seeing if it's ready to go to market, but likely need some change in order to get better. So what is the biggest lesson that you've learned that you would share with an entrepreneur looking to save them years worth of mistakes?
I have so many. We could do a whole podcast on this. I would say my biggest lesson, I'm trying to think of which one I want to share based on the conversation we've had. My biggest lesson would probably be to do your research. And I think that comes in many forms. Okay. And I'm going to give some examples of what I'm referring to. Do your research when you're hiring someone. Really do your research on that person and check those references, and, interview them more than once and be really sure that they are the person you want to hire. It is hard sometimes to fire people, especially if it's at a big corporation. And, not that I was, but like when I owned my own company, but eventually I was. And it's just important that you do your research when you're hiring. It also is important to do your research when you're selling your company. And, I did my research with Bump Club, and I definitely looked into things, but there are things that I wish that I would have done more of. And I guess I wish I would have talked to more founders who had sold their businesses. I talked to a few, and I talked to many more after, but I wish that I had talked to those many more before. And it's just really important to take your time to do your due diligence, no matter what decision it is that you're making. And especially, and I refer to this all the time because I'm going to say who taught me this in a minute, but, if someone's pursuing you for a partnership, for sale, for employment, they're pursuing you. So take the time that you need to make that decision, because they're not going to go anywhere if they want to work with you or buy you or whatever. Ball is in your court. And that was actually shared with me by Jill Smokler, who founded a company called Scary Mommy. And she sold her company before I sold my company. And that was something that she shared on my podcast. And I couldn't agree with her more, because I felt like pressure to make a decision when I was selling my company, and they were pursuing me. And that was something that I wish I had maybe taken like a minute of extra time to like do a little more due diligence. I don't think the outcome would have been different, but I think my knowledge going into the situation would have been different.
Oh, that's great advice. And I think it translates to a lot. Right. So there's probably companies or people that are coming to work with you right now that reach out to you. You're like, hey, Lindsay, I want you to work with me. And it might feel for us entrepreneurs getting that rush, like, oh my gosh, yes, I have to, potentially, give them a discount, or like when people start asking for those things, you know what? They're the ones that reached out to me.
It's very interesting that you say that. And you really should go look at the reel I posted on Instagram last night, because I shared on Instagram that when someone comes to you, they're coming to you because you are an expert at something. When they want to work with you or hire you, it's because you're the expert and you have done something that they need you to do for them. And so if you put together a proposal for them and then they start pulling components out, or like nickel and diming you, or saying, well, I don't need you to do this, but I don't need you to do this, it's okay to say no and to walk away. And I just did that last week, because when that happens, you're being set up for failure. And you can't provide the success that you would want to provide if someone is taking your process apart and not allowing you to do it to completion. I know not everyone has the liberty of saying no to clients, but I also think it's about mindset. And if you say no to a client, you're going to get another client, and there will be a client that you put the proposal in front of and they're like, yeah, sure, sign me up. Those are the clients that you want, because the clients that nickel and dime you and take things out of your proposal and piecemeal things, those are the clients that are going to eat up all your time and they're going to make you insane.
Oh yeah. No, I love that. I'll definitely check out that Instagram reel, but love that.
That's very funny, because I almost was like, oh, did he see my Instagram lesson?
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, no, definitely check that out. And I appreciate you kind of tying that together as well. The last thing that we'll talk about is the distribution. So obviously with beer, we have it ready to go. We're going to go market and sell it. We're marketers, so we're good at that. But I mean, like I said, I am just absolutely amazed by your story, amazed by the transition, amazed by what you're doing now. And obviously you have the podcast and you're making a massive impact. What does the future hold for you? What are some exciting things that you're continuing to work on here over the next couple of years?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I think in the beginning when I left Bump Club, I kind of just said to myself, I want to get some clients. And I didn't really know what that meant, to be very honest. I put myself out there. I sent an email to everyone that I knew, which I highly suggest to anyone when they're starting. And so many people don't do it. And I said, I'm taking clients. I can help you with your marketing. I can help you with your community building, with your social media. It was very broad. And as I started working with clients, Bump Club was my first client. I did a project for them wrapping up for about 8 weeks. And during that time, I got 2 more clients. And I haven't had a lull since, but through the time working with clients, I realized that what I truly am good at and what I truly love to do is building communities. And a lot of times people are like, well, isn't social media community? Yes, it is, but that's one piece of your community. And so the process that I utilize with my clients now to build their community includes all of the things that I did for Bump Club and all of the things that I'm doing for Dear Founder, which is social media, content on your website, emails, publicity, podcasting, partnerships. All of those elements kind of tie into building a community. And it's just a different way of looking at marketing. So now I work with both big brands. I mean, I work with 9-figure companies, and I take on projects where I do it for them and I consult with them. And then oftentimes that they hire me to do it also. And then I also coach other female founders who are just getting their businesses set up and running. And, and I help them kind of move things along. I taught a class that I created last February, and I loved it. And I'm kind of working on how I want to present that again, because I want to be able to give my knowledge to as many people as possible. So that will probably come in early 2023. And it's funny because when I left Bump Club, I was like, oh, well, I never have to do events again. That's not the case. So, and not that I don't like doing events. I do. And I love the in-person connection, but I just didn't think that was going to be in my wheelhouse. But with my podcast and all the female founders that I'm impacting and meeting, they all want to network. And so I fell into an event earlier this summer where I hosted Dear Founder, and I hosted a panel of female founders, and it was all founders who had been on my podcast. And we had well over 50, maybe even 75 people show up to this event. And people were like, when are you going to do it again? And so we are talking about creating a series next year, potentially in cities outside of Chicago as well. Obviously, that's what I did for Bump Club for moms. And, hopefully that will become part of my community offering to the people who listen to my podcast and who follow me. And I think eventually and essentially what I want to do is build up the Dear Founder community to be a place where female founders feel that they can come, get advice, get information, and get support. And it's a lot of the things that I didn't feel that I had until pretty late in the game. And I want to be able to provide that for founders early on.
I love it. I love your mission and your vision and everything that you're working on, and the impact that obviously comes along with it. I'm excited to continue watching your journey from afar and seeing everything you got going on. So, Lindsay, I really appreciate you hopping on the show today. Thank you so much. Where can people find out more about you, whether it's a website, social media, all of those things? We'll put it in the show notes.
Of course. Well, thank you so much again for having me. This has been so fun, and you're doing a great job. So keep it up. I love everything that you're doing with this podcast.
Thank you.
people can find me on social media at Lindsay Pinchuk and also at lindsaypinchuk.com. You can also find more from Dear Found Her on the Dear Found Her Instagram. And then wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Dear Found Her. We drop episodes every Tuesday and Thursday.
Awesome. Well, we'll have that in the show notes for the audience. Again, Lindsay, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you again to our audience for tuning into today's podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, download, and share our content. Leaving a 5-star review goes a long way. And thank you, as always, to Half Coast Studios. If you're in St. Louis and looking to start your own podcast or take your current one to the next level, then you seriously need to come check out what they have going on here. We'll see you all next week. And remember, entrepreneurs aren't born, they are brewed.
I'm an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs aren't born, they're brewed. Thank you for listening to Entrepreneur Podcast with your host, Adam McChesney. Let's